So I'm just going to go ahead and get started, Corey, if you don't mind.
No, do what you got to do. Go to work.
This introduction. All right, so hello. On behalf of the AIHEC Asetone Network Project, I want to welcome you to today's webinar featuring Dr. Corey Welch. My name is Daryl Monto, and I am the coordinator for the project. Before I formally introduce Dr. Welch, I wanted to share a little bit of information about the project, who we are, what we do, just to give some more background as to what we're about. The project is funded by the National Institutes of Health and is staffed by myself as the project coordinator and Dr. Deborah Horses-Sunder, who is the project director. Our project is focused on promoting interest and engaging tribal college students in health and biomedical research. We are working with the University of Nebraska Medical Center and with all of the tribal colleges to establish a network community, and we will be offering resources, information, and opportunities to tribal college students over this next year. The word Asetone comes from the Cheyenne language and refers to the concept of growth and taking first steps. This is kind of how this project was envisioned, is that we were wanting to assist tribal college students and help grow their interest in health and biomedical research over time. We have several programs and activities planned, and I would like to highlight a few real quickly. First, we will be launching a mentoring program in mid-March. The program will be open to tribal college students, and they will be part of a tribal college faculty member or a professional native researcher in a field of interest. Second, we will continue to host webinars over the course of the year featuring tribal college faculty and also native professionals in the health and biomedical professions. This webinar series is part of our outreach efforts to inform tribal college students about research and the many opportunities that it can afford. Lastly, we'll be hosting a 2-week summer program in June at the University of Nebraska Medical Center campus in Omaha. The Aseto'ne Institute will be informative, engaging, and a fun program that will bring tribal college students from all over the country to the UNMC campus to participate in workshops, seminars, and discussions, and to learn more about health and biomedical research, academic programs, and professions. Students will be provided transportation, lodging, meals, and additional support from the host organizations. And we will be opening up the online application hopefully next week. And of course, getting more information out to all of the tribal colleges. This is just a brief overview of some of the events and activities that we have lined up. There will be more information coming, and I encourage you to visit our webpage or follow us on Facebook, or even feel free to email me directly, dmonto@aihec.org. Okay, so let's get into the presentation. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce today's guest speaker, Dr. Corey Welch, who will be giving the presentation titled Environmental Issues of Coal and Economic Development for the Northern Cheyenne and Other Tribal Nations. Dr. Welch is Northern Cheyenne from Montana and has his PhD in biology. He currently serves as the director of the STEM Scholars Program at Iowa State University in Ames. Previously, he has worked with tribal college students before and taught courses at Haskell Nations University. Dr. Welch also serves on the board of directors for SACNAS, and for those of you not familiar, SACNAS is the National Society for the Advancement of Hispanics, Chicanos, and Native American Scientists. Wonderful organization, and is currently the secretary-elect for the board of directors. He is committed to assisting students, especially students of color in STEM, and is a role model and strong advocate for Native students in higher education. One important item that I really wanted to note about Corey, he provides an annual scholarship to Northern Cheyenne students who are currently enrolled in college. It is called the Sharon Farr Welch Northern Cheyenne Tribal Scholarship. I think that's a really wonderful thing that you're doing, Corey, and I truly appreciate that. So I just wanted to kind of put that in there. So with that, I will introduce Dr. Corey Welch, and you can go ahead and get started.
Thank you. Thank you, Daryl. Thank you, AIHEC and NIH for the funding for this. I'm going to start a little mini timer for myself just to kind of scale things a little bit. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the environmental issues facing Northern Cheyenne and coal. Before I get into that, I'm going to give a little bit of my background and kind of how I got this, because I just feel it's important that I introduce myself to some extent and how I became a biologist. My roots as a biologist stem from my tribal background, from family tradition of being on the reservation roads with my grandfather, my uncles, my mom, my grandmother, and we'd be, why are we down this road? Seeing what we could see was always said to us. And so that early on, I was always taught to learn to pay attention to nature. And that eventually, when I got into college, gave me a big advantage when I started doing biology. because I was really locked in on birds and mammals and things. And so there's some photos of my family and then me when I was young, thin, and had hair. Good times. So seeing what I could see, I got to work on some bees, some weird rodents on these different topics here. This weird pocket gopher that the Nisqually people knew as Mescada, which is the thief, because it would raid their gardens as gophers burrow in and eat tubers and plant material. And so I get to work on some of these amazing animals, and they get to show me a little bit about their world. My career goal is my goal is to diversify who succeeds in STEM, and these are some of the students I've had opportunities to work with at Haskell, at UC Berkeley, and now at Iowa State, where I have a small program that is continuing to grow of different science majors for students of low-income, first-gen, and/or minority groups. And so this is a growing thing that I'm hoping will expand and expand to many hundred students. The program basically is developing some skills and things like that around developing career leaders and change agents within the field of STEM. Want creative problem solvers, which is real common if you're low income and you're native. You're at college, hell yes, you're already, language, sorry. You are a creative problem solver. I just guarantee that. And it was just this community that we build here, and I provide some research support, internships, and other career activities. And this is just kind of the highlights of that program. So enough about me. Let's start talking about some of the bigger issues facing natural resources in Indian country. And I just posted some photos of some important images and people regarding natural resources from Eloise Colville, Billy Frank, the water protectors, White Mountain and the plant, the removal of the Elwha Dam, Dr. Carlita Chief on the upper right talking about dealing with her research on water quality and uranium in Dene country. So these are some people and folks around there. Obviously, they're just kind of, there's some people in the trenches doing heavy lifting or have done heavy lifting that kind of is given power to native people across the country and globe in some situations for empowerment of indigenous sustainability and sovereignty. This is an ongoing issue. If this happened in December, is the Trump administration cut 2 million acres of land from a couple of different wildlife refuges and national monument areas. These areas are rich in coal, uranium, oil. So obviously the Navajo Nation, the Utes, the other folks in the region all are well aware of these things. And so this is going to be an ongoing issue that's going to require creative leaders across Indian country to maintain access to the important sites for us culturally, and also economic and other kinds of sustainability for protecting our air, water, etc., and our just general health. Even this happened 3 days ago. There's a recent increase. So this is, I'm just hitting all these points just to say this is an ongoing thing that we need more educated leaders. We need more students getting the skills to actually be in the trenches, doing the science, doing the public policy, doing the health-related research impacts and environmental impacts. So let's talk about across Indian country in general. Basically, we have a huge amount of the natural resources in this country, renewable and non-renewable. Grazing lands, commercial forests, harvesting, crops, oil and gas reserves, uranium. You can see Western coal reserves, 30%, and annual trust royalty payments, of which there was a big lawsuit that just got settled within the last decade regarding the mismanagement of those kind of funds. But the thing to think about, which I don't think people, this little factoid I like to pound in people's heads, is if you just take the lower 48, 10th largest state, of course it's scattered across 560 plus recognized tribal nations, but we have a huge impact on the natural resource and the energy policy in this country. And so we have opportunities to kind of be at the table on stakeholders and our values and vision for what this might look like is going to be, we're going to be at that, we're going to be part of that conversation. Talking about my tribe specifically, there's about 5,000 members on the reservation itself in eastern Montana. It's about the 35th, 36th largest reservation, so it's not huge, but it's not particularly small. Rural. One boundary is the Tongue River to the east, which is an important waterway that'll be brought up a little bit later in this presentation. There's a couple other prominent water sources in the area that have coal and other related activities nearby. High unemployment rate, tribal government is primary employer. We have some light logging through the Custer National Forest that extends onto the reservation, but it's not a huge economic force. There's pressure to develop fracking. There's been a couple of fights around that, and more importantly, it's always been about coal, and I'll talk about coal. And I just always like to highlight that we do have a wonderful tribal college in Lame Deer itself, Dull Knife Tribal College. The issues around this, particularly around coal, the most recent stuff has been happening in the last 6 to 7 years that's related to the Northern Cheyenne. This is on the Huffington Post. Coal Hungry World brings tough choices for Native Americans, particularly coal towards China. And this is from 2014. 2011, the Orient Express will Montana become a coal colony. So there's billionaire folks investing in the idea that we can tap into some of this amazing coal out of the Powder River Basin in Wyoming and Montana and serve global markets around coal. So I think I mentioned this in the previous slide, but 30% of U.S. coal reserves west of the Mississippi are located on native lands, or the pathway for the delivery of that coal is trains that will haul to a port. And the issue with just even hauling coal through your lands or train tracks, the dust actually flies out of the cart a little bit. So it's highly toxic. It leaves a fine dust along the tracks, railroad communities. It can get kicked up into the dust. It can end up in the groundwater very easily. And so there's some chronic diseases associated with that, which I won't list here, but emphysema, asthma, the CWP and COPD. These are issues of working directly with coal, but these indirect things as far as asthma, emphysema hits wider communities and is often harder to track and detect. But you'll see higher incidences of these diseases around those communities that have railroad tracks or coal mining in the area. So specifically the Northern Cheyennes and coal, give you a little bit of brief history. There's been some eco activity, which I'll talk about, the Otter Creek on the lower right. You can see a picture of the trains. You can see that open top on a coal car. So that's where just it bouncing around is going to lead to some particulates bouncing around out of the coal. So the brief history, to give you a sense, the Powder River Basin is one of the largest, if not the largest, coal area in the world. It's a huge, huge area of land. There's many mines in this area, and there's, on the lower left, is a proposed Otter Creek mine, which we'll talk a fair bit about in this presentation. I point out Colstrip on the little dot on the left figure, and then you can see it on the right figure, and you see that Colstrip's about 20 miles north of the Northern Cheyenne Res, and you can see that the Northern Cheyenne Reservation is completely encompassed within the Powder River Basin coal. So in fact, if you stick a shovel in the ground, you're going to hit coal on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation. This is the coal-fired plants that are supported by just this region. And so you can see this is a huge U.S. Supported policy. So to develop coal in this area. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of these, about the production in that area, but for what it's worth over time. But just wanted to give you a sense that this is a nationwide, this region is supplying the nation effectively. So part of the reason the Cheyennes have never developed coal goes back to the prophecy of sweet medicine, one of our early creators and spiritual leaders. He said, "They will come looking for a certain stone. They will take without asking. These people will not listen to what you have to say, and they will kill all the animals." Pretty good prophecy. I mean, it nails a definite aspect of all U.S. tribal relations on a lot of different levels. Insert your different categories. And so as a result, the Cheyennes have chosen to have a relatively pristine environment relative to what they could have done to the land around. So there's some legal fights, how they've had to fight to actually protect that. And so that's what I want to highlight here, some activities in the last 40 to 50 years that have gone. And mind you, nearly all of this funding for this has been, for these legal fights, has been run by the Northern Cheyenne tribe. So we're not a wealthy tribe. So this is a big investment that's had broader impacts and implications for across Indian country. And it shows a value judgment of the people. So in the 1970s, the Montana Power Company and several utilities in Washington and Oregon launched and built 2 coal-fired plants at Colstrip. And these are called plants 1 and 2. The tribe became concerned at the time because of the prevailing wind patterns and pollution that these plants might pollute the watershed. And there were no, in the 1970s, there was no legal standards. They weren't, the plants, the private companies were not obligated to minimize such pollution. So the tribe sought legal protection of its air quality. What's happening here? There we go. So the tribe initiated, they just adopted, we're going to be the first unit of government, federal, state, local, to raise our air quality standards to the most pristine level. So the air quality on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation is that of a national park and wildlife wilderness areas. In 1982, in violation of trust responsibilities, the Secretary of Interior, this is a Republican administration for what it's worth, held the largest coal lease sale and public auction in the nation's history. The tracts offered basically were all around the Northern Cheyenne Res. And so faced with that reality and inability to get any change in the policy or involvement in the decision process, the tribe sued. And it was a big fight, and it took a decade. The tribe prevailed on all of its claims, and it established that all this is important impact for today is all future development in the areas adjoining the reservation must be a trust responsibility to identify and mitigate, so cut down the adverse impacts on affected tribes. And so this has been a service to beyond Montana and the Northern Cheyenne Nation. Round 2 was, okay, they got their butt handed to them on federal law. What if we focus on not federal lands, but can we do state and private lands? Can we go to around the federal limitations that we just lost in the court case to some state issues? And so they planned it along the Tongue River, so that's that eastern barrier of the reservation, and they got private landowners and state lands. And so basically the federal role was minimized. The state of Montana issued the permits, and these were rubber stamped by the federal authorities. Again, the tribe fought, and it took another decade, 15 plus years, to actually win that lawsuit. In the meantime, 2 more power plants were built in Colstrip, which is, again, 20 miles north. This is what Colstrip looks like today. And I just on a personal note, I'd like to acknowledge this is where my mom, all my aunts and uncles went to high school. This is where 2 of my uncles worked at this power plants for their whole careers. Their families were raised in Colstrip. My brother still works part-time or frequently in shifts down in Colstrip. So this is a place where my family's socioeconomic livelihood is based off of this area. So this is personal, but also is just kind of the realities of kind of figuring this out. So literally the town is called Colstrip. So it is a definite mining town. Give you a broader sense of the Powder River Basin and the coal production over the last 4 or 5 decades. These are in millions of tons, and it's been a slight decline in the last couple of years towards the end of the Obama administration. And that also is related to fracking and other just economic, broader global energy policies. Whether or not Trump changes or push towards making coal more viable on the global and national market remains to be seen if there'll be an increase in coal production. I guess it's probably too early to say at this point. I don't have that data. But it's something to be mindful of moving forward. So again, just wanted to show this reminder that we're talking across the U.S. in this policy. How many coal miners are we talking in the U.S.? Roughly about 50 to 60,000. So these mining jobs are, my brother would be considered in this mining industry, even though he does not actually have a shovel in his hand. But this is a small field we have a large economic policy to support basically 50,000 workers. Just to give you a sense, the solar, I think, is double. The number of people working in the solar industry is double what the coal is. You haven't checked the numbers exactly, but it's definitely much higher than there's for coal. So where are we in regards to coal development in Northern Cheyenne region today? It's just round 3 of this kind of approach. So in 2011, 2010, there was a push to establish a series of coal trains to serve China and the eastern markets. And so this would involve driving coal to different ports in Oregon and Washington. That involved going across Yakima Nation. It would involve the Lummi Nation up in the northern part of Washington state. It would involve the Hoh tribe in Washington and the Coos area in Oregon. So again, this was a big push and vision of how to do this. And more specifically, down to Montana was this Otter Creek mine related to the Northern Cheyenne. So it was just off the reservation, a tributary into the Tongue River. You can see on the vision on the right, you can see where it's proportionally. And there would be a new railroad along from the Otter Creek up to Miles City to an existing train track that would then lead it to Washington and Oregon. That was the proposal this company put forward, and the fight happened basically around that. A group of young Cheyennes and elders helped form an Eco-Cheyenne group to fight this coal development. I'm going to play a 4-minute video, and I think this will kind of give you a sense of aspects of this.
The land, to me, it's very unique. I just love southeastern Montana. This is my home, and my love for this place is so deep because it's who I am.
Maybe you can't see it, but this land is an island in a sea of coal development. It's the Northern Cheyenne Indian Reservation, located in a region that produces 40% of U.S. coal, sending it from coast to coast.
It's a place no one really thinks about, but that everyone is impacted by. If you're paying attention to energy and climate change, you need to be paying attention to the Powder River Basin. Billions and billions of tons of coal lie under the ground here. And what happens here will determine how the United States does on its climate policy.
Researchers say we have to leave most fossil fuels in the ground if we're going to limit climate change to 2 degrees Celsius. That's when droughts get supercharged and some low-lying countries may actually disappear. The scale of change that's needed is staggering. For natural gas and oil, sure, but especially for coal. In the United States, 95% of coal must be left unburned. It's a message many indigenous people here have taken to heart.
Our land is an extension of our home. We have to protect it for our children and grandchildren and future generations that are yet to come.
But taking a stand against fossil fuels has come with a price for the Northern Cheyenne. And some tribal members want to see their resources extracted for profit.
We have 80% unemployment. And every day I see the poverty the desperation. I believe coal will give people work, and I don't see anything else happening.
It's funny because the industry always says coal provides cheap energy. Go to the reservation and you see that people are spending $600 to $700 a month on their bills in the winter. It's not cheap. So as we're saying no to these new coal mines, we need to be moving forward with the renewables and making sure people know that there's alternatives.
This is the room we stay in. There's 4 of us in here. Put blankets on the windows, cover up, because it gets pretty chilly in here at night.
In spite of that, you were telling me that you're not in favor of developing coal. There's some people who say that would create jobs.
Yeah, a lot of people say that, but it's beautiful out here, and I don't want to see it ruined. I think at one point did all the money. So future-wise, my kids would have. Let's go home.
Our tribe is really struggling. Yes, we need jobs. Yes, we need a sustainable economy, but not at the price of our homelands. There's a better way, and it's going to take some education. It's going to take some work, but in the long run, it's going to be better.
Vanessa Braden here is trying to lead a revolution away from coal and towards cleaner energy. The Northern Cheyenne shouldn't have to fight this on their own, and they shouldn't have to choose between jobs and clean energy. They need our support. They need world leaders to send clear signals that coal is dangerous and costly.
All right. So I thought that was a pretty nice summary of kind of where some of these things are at. Where we're at as far as that story kind of captured where things were at with the Otter Creek in particular. In March of 2016, Oregon moved to cut coal power, and there were ties to Colstrip itself. Ironically, the state of Washington owns 2 of the 4 power plants in Colstrip, and they are attempting to buy the other 2 remaining power plants. The reason being is the state of Washington passed a law in 2015 to phase out all energy from coal. E.g., they would close all 4 power plants in Colstrip. Effectively, that town would die. And it's just kind of that's the primary job provider in that town, and it's a small town. And so this is an ongoing challenge around this that involves regional efforts and some global implications. So in March, like 1 week after that article came out, the coal company that was proposed the Otter Creek mine actually decided to drop this development plan. And so this is a victory page from the Eco Cheyenne group. Is that the end of this? That's what we're going to talk a little bit more about moving forward. I should just point out the ARC Coal Company filed for bankruptcy about a month later after this March 10th decision. And just the day before or 3 days before they filed for bankruptcy, they gave out $8 million in bonuses to the 12 executives. So I mean, you can kind of do that's some sketchy ethical behavior for what it's worth. Round 4 is kind of what's ongoing with the last election. Is Trump has ended the administration freeze that Obama had set out for offering coal leases. So this is part of his effort that he actively pushed for during the campaign. What this impact remains to be seen. The reaction to this from the Northern Cheyenne has been quick, which was I don't know that they have filed yet, but they have planned to file a lawsuit if this actually starts getting implemented into coal leases. So there's an ongoing challenge facing the Northern Cheyenne. So this isn't completely free of there's not a resolution at this point. I got questions. It's my friend Jason making a good joke there. And I've got some discussion topics just kind of depending on where we're at with folks that may have them. And I need to get out of this screen here for a second to see where the Zoom participants. Sorry about this. Does anybody have questions or comments they'd like to ask? So, given that, I would like to just basically share some of the ideas that I was thinking about regarding questions that you might want to consider moving forward as we talk about this. So specifically, what are some of the pros and cons of development? So we've got this 80% unemployment. We've got resources potentially right there in the ground. What's the economic potential impact for the tribe on an individual basis? What are the costs of that development? Those are some different things that you as individual leaders have to kind of assess and figure out what is appropriate to you and your community, and how to manage around that. And a further discussion point to consider would be to, and if we had a group here, it would be list some of the pros and cons, and let's talk about some of what those might be. And then lastly, these are some just more philosophical kind of questions that as political leaders within your tribal communities, you need to kind of think about, which is, are there ways to maintain tribal control and sovereignty while developing natural resources? You're often going to have to partner with non-native folks for the economic cost of the initial investments, these coal and mining companies, forestry companies, things like that. How do you develop those kind of relationships? There are some good models out there across Indian country where this is being done, but there's more of a history of pretty bad relationships involved. What are the conditions in which you say, yes, let's bring in the development? You know, what are deal breakers for you as an individual? What are the deal breakers for your tribe? Will that work with state and federal agencies and also global stakeholders? So when you're talking about environmental issues, you have to deal with the stakeholders. Who is impacted by this? It's got to be, if the tribe and the individuals are not buying into this, then you're not going to be very successful with any kind of policy. So it's the local folks that are going to dictate whether this is going to be a positive or negative relationship. So those are just my big picture ideas and conversation points. We are, across the country, we are in desperate need of more native scientists, more environmental scientists. We have engineers, we have lawyers. We can always use more of those, obviously, because this story I've been telling has been mostly the law side of things. You know, is there a better way to engineeringly develop some of these processes? But we also need some just great biologists with native backgrounds that are going to work back in their communities to manage biodiversity, understand what the impact of these things. For a lot of tribes, we don't really even know fully what plants and animals are there, like in detail. Are these populations increasing, declining, that kind of level? We know it's there because these are plants and animals and stones and things that we have relationships with. But how are they doing in the big picture requires some biology surveys and things like that before you can actually then start manipulating the environment with the development plan of different resources so you can track potential changes. So that's my little rambling bit. If there's any questions, I'm happy to take them. Otherwise, Daryl, I'll let you weigh in.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate you taking time, Corey, to share this valuable research with us and the work that you've done and everything, just to bring folks who may not know up to par on what's happening. And I can see where, you know, there's just so much need, you know, just for more work to be done, more knowledge to be shared. And, you know, for me, just kind of thinking about, you know, the impact on the health, you know, environmental community, what's going on there, how everything's connected. And so I think that's really important to note, and things that we could actually be looking into as this develops and continues. So, but again, I appreciate you taking time from your schedule, and we will be sharing this information, and hopefully we'll have it uploaded and on our website available for others to again share and hopefully use in class too. Great discussion points, things to consider. I really appreciate you developing those out for us. So that's been great. So with that, do you have any closing remarks? Anything that?
No, I kind of did my little soapbox thing. I mean, we just need, with these kind of things, with these economic developments, it has a huge impact on our health and viability as sovereign people. And so, yes, the economic rewards is potentially high in some of these situations, but without an assessment of kind of what the costs are, we're kind of we have across, I'm talking about Indian country in general, we have this large land base, we have a stake in this. We are big enough players that we need to be unified in kind of how we want to approach this across Indian country, so that we're not just taking advantage and it was like one tribe's, I got mine, and screw the rest of the nation with a federal policy that develops out of that the other tribes then have to fight against. So there's some thought makers that have kind of already established some of these things, but individual tribes are going to be thrown a carrot of, if just from the example of the video, if they cut the heating costs by 80%, cut everybody a check for $500 a month for those 3-4 months during winter when it's brutal in Montana for heating. That might be enough to sway, which would be gross on one level, but it can be a small carrot that companies may try to do to influence. All of a sudden the tribe's like, well, I could use $500 or $1,000 to pay my heating costs, but what are you giving up in the process? And how do you maintain control or in that development? And so that's going to continue to be an ongoing challenge for tribal governments and individual politicians as we develop policy around these issues.
I agree. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and end our webinar here. Thank you for joining us, and Corey, well, thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you soon here in Lawrence.
Yep. See you in Lawrence next time.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.